We often assume that we know enough to make the right decisions, and most of the time we're right. But then no two situations are exact copies of each other, and this presents the case of dealing with unforeseen scenarios. And also, these often are the things that throw us off course into slipping up and making the wrong decisions. So, regardless of how much you know, I believe there's always room to add on to what you already know. And this is why we often take the pain to break down seemingly simple subjects so you can be well armed when your day of reckoning comes. I'm Desmond Kafui, and you're welcome to another episode of Ghana Ground Up. We're all about the real estate sector in Ghana, and if any information we share here helps you make an informed decision, our job is done. It's exciting when you're renting your first place. You're going to finally be on your own and manage your own affairs. And you're probably looking forward to the moments when you get the keys to the apartment and you step in and begin to live. Today's episode covers mistakes first-time renters often make here in Ghana and probably elsewhere. And even though we're focused on Ghana, I believe that what we share is universal with a few exceptions. Renting may seem straightforward, and a lot of people think you just find a house, pay for it, and you move in. But then one wrong move can cost you your money, your comfort, and your peace of mind. And in as much as you don't want this to happen to you, I don't want this to happen to you either. So let's break down the mistakes people make when renting for the first time and how you can avoid these mistakes. Often, one of the first mistakes a lot of people make when renting is that they sign a lease without fully understanding what they're signing up for. It's really exciting when you finally find a place you love and you're ready to move in, and then the landlord hands you a lease agreement. What do most people do? They just sign, or sometimes they just glance through it and append their signature. Big mistake. Most people don't realize that the lease or the tenancy agreement is actually a rule book and not just the basic terms and conditions agreements to give you access to the property for the period you're renting it for. Now, this document becomes the rule book that governs your time in that property. It determines what you can do and what you cannot do, how long you'll stay, how much you pay, and also whether you'll be crying in frustration when you are hit with unexpected terms that you did not see because you didn't take your time to read through the document. So before you sign anything, here's what you need to check. Number one, be sure you're clear on the rent advance and also the payment terms. Are you paying for 1 year, 2 years, or more? What happens if you need to leave before the contract is up? Now, another thing you need to be clear about is that you need to be clear on the terms of renewal. You need to be aware if your rent can be increased at any time or maybe suddenly. Now, some landlords increase their rent without notice. Others will throw in unexpected fees that maybe were not there before when you were signing up. And this sometimes happens when your initial rent term is over and you're renewing. And it's highly likely that you'll end up paying more than what you paid for when you started. And even though this is often expected, you need to be clear on these things right from the beginning so you're not hit up with any unpleasant surprises. And then there's the issue of security deposit. This is often 1 month's worth of rent paid to the landlord beyond what you normally pay for the time you're renting for. And this is to cover damages at the end of your rent. And if you wish to move on from that property, then the landlord will end up taking some part of that security deposit. And if everything remains intact, your landlord should refund all of this money to you. But then you need to be clear on this if your landlord will refund the money when you're moving out or if it will become one of those pool C situations. Finally, you need to be very clear on who will handle the maintenance of the property. If something breaks, say the plumbing goes bad or the lights stop working, is it your problem or is it the landlord's problem? Some places expect the tenants to handle all the minor repairs by themselves, but then in other cases, the landlord will end up taking care of these repairs. In Ghana, most landlords will wash their hands off once you move into the property, and they'll be happy to make any fixes before you assume occupancy. But then once you move in, they'll give you a grace period of just about a few months, and then you're on your own. I remember a situation where a landlord installed a pump for his tenants, and within 2 weeks, the pump broke and the landlord emphatically stated that he had done his part by installing that water pump, and as it was broken, it was up to the tenants to fix it. And they had no option. They had to do it, though unwillingly. And this is often the case that many people will have to deal with. Here's my suggestion: slow down, take your time. Read the agreements very, very carefully. Make sure you understand what is written in there. And if there's something you're not clear about, ask questions. If you're still not sure, get a second opinion. Often we don't count property rentals as a big thing to bring in some legal consultation. But then, based on what you're dealing with, that is the type of property, the rules, the expectations, and all that, a small legal consultation fee now could help probably save you a lot of money and stress much later down the line. The second mistake is choosing the wrong location. You can find a beautiful house, but then if it's in a wrong area, you will be stressed out in the long term. Imagine this: you move in and suddenly you realize that number one, the traffic is a nightmare. And you spend, let's say, 2 to 3 hours just trying to get to work from where you live. This you already know. I bet you already know someone who spends a couple of hours commuting to and from work just because of the traffic. And there are some key locations that are prone to this, but then I'll just hold up so that I don't probably water down anybody's desire to rent in those locations. You also notice that there's no stable electricity and that you may be in darkness half of the time you spend there. Now, you may say that that is a thing of the past, and I agree, it's not an issue of doomsday. But then there are places I know personally that have frequent power outages, and hopefully you're not in any such place. There's also the issue of frequent water shortages, meaning that you're constantly looking for or calling on water delivery trucks to get you water, which means you either have to get a reasonably sized water tank or line up a corridor with yellow gallons. And if you know, you know. The struggle is real. So before you commit to a place, ask yourself some key questions. Now you have to ask yourself, how far is the location from your work, school, or places you normally visit often? A long commute may not seem like a big deal at first, but then eventually it adds up. You also need to ask yourself if the utilities there are stable. Is the area prone to blackouts or water shortages? And if possible, ask the current tenants or neighbors in the area before you make a crucial decision of taking up occupancy in that location. And you also need to ask yourself if there are shops, markets, or hospitals that are nearby. You definitely don't want to travel miles or kilometers just to buy some basic groceries. And also, very key, you need to find out how safe the area is. Is crime an issue? Are there security concerns? You need to visit the area at different times to get a full picture about the location. Yours truly suffered a burglary when I moved into my apartment somewhere last year, and I lost all my equipment. So we had to go on an unplanned break, and we're glad to be back. And I've learned my lessons. But then don't wait to become a victim before you learn the way to go about these things. So, location is everything, and do well to choose wisely. The third mistake is falling for real estate scams. Now, this is one of the very serious issues that you need to be aware of. Scammers are everywhere, and first time renters are their favorite targets, mainly because they are more prone to naivety compared to those who have traversed the rental system for a while. Here's how scammers operate. Some fake agents will show you a house, they'll take a viewing fee, and then they'll disappear. You won't see them again. And all they want is that viewing fee. And this one is quite petty, but then it's still a scam because sometimes the viewing fees may be probably 50 cities, 100 cities. Some may go up based on the location and the ease of access to the location. So once they get that fee, they just bolt with it, and that is it. As I said, it's petty, but then it's still a scam. On the other hand, some agents will rent out the same property to multiple people, and by the time you realize, someone else is knocking on your door and introducing themselves as the new occupants of your property. It all sounds funny, but then it's real. I mean, you may brush it aside, but then you don't want this to happen to you. Some people create fake property documents to look very legitimate, and then they vanish once they collect your deposits. Many people have paid for properties only to attempt moving in, and then they realize that the properties are locked up, and then the real owners of the property show up and deny any knowledge of the transaction or even the agent you transacted with. So, how do you protect yourself from these scams? Never pay any money, especially the rent, before physically inspecting the property. An agent may send you pictures or videos of the property, but then go there and see the property in person before you make any payments. And also, don't make any payments to the agent. Make the payments to the landlord, and do well to have proofs of payment so that you keep yourself safe in the times ahead. You can take some pictures, you can take some videos as you're making payment, especially if it's a cash payment. And I would normally not advise you to do an all cash payment. Do well to go through the banks and all that. But then if you have to do cash payments, make sure you have some proof. Now, some people may be wary of you taking pictures and all that, but then you can ask them that you want to do that as a way of documenting the process of making the payment, just to be some kind of proof. And if they don't agree to that, well, I mean, it may be a red flag, but then try your own ways of being your own spy and then sneaking up some pictures here and there just to protect yourself in the times ahead. As much as possible, do well to pay through a bank account because that leaves a trail that can be proof should something go wrong compared to paying everything in cash. Secondly, ask for the landlord's identification and also ask to verify the ownership of the property. Now, you can even check with the Lands Commission to be sure that the landlord is the owner of the property you're transacting on. This is something most people won't normally do because they assume that they're only renting the property and they're not buying it, and it's not a big deal. But then it's a big deal when you're putting your money to this property. So, should the need arise, the checks that you end up conducting at the Lands Commission will come in to save you from potential issues or even scams in the long run. So, don't assume that you're just renting the property and it's not a big deal. Do well to do your due diligence if that entails checking the validity or the authenticity of the ownership of the property and keep yourself safe. Lastly, use trusted real estate agents or referrals. Don't just trust any random listings you see online. Or don't just call some number you saw on some shabby poster somewhere through town and trust that they will be good with your money. If a deal looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Stay sharp, stay safe. Another mistake many first-time renters normally make is that they don't budget for extra costs. Now, many of the first-time renters normally focus on just the rent and then they don't think of any other things that may come up. But let me tell you, there is likely to be more to pay for than just the rent. When you're renting, you obviously have to think about certain things, and those include your utility bills, your electricity, your water, your waste collection, and sometimes even other stuff just to maintain the house. But then most people often don't consider that they have to pay for all these things. Now, another thing you need to pay for is your service charges. If you live in an apartment or in a gated community, there will always be extra fees you pay monthly, quarterly, or even yearly, and you can't hide from paying these fees. Now, some people also don't consider the cost of furnishing the property and even the cost of moving into the property. Now, even if they do, they often underestimate the costs that are involved. If the property is already furnished, then that's great, all good for you. Otherwise, you're up for some really, really big expenses. You're furnishing, maybe you need some extra cabinets here and there, and maybe the furniture you have will not fit into that space, so you will need to do some adjustments here and there. All these things are hidden costs that normally come up and spring up surprises on first time renters. So do well to be minded of all these things and don't just budget for only the rent. Most of the time, I would advise you to probably set aside about 3 to 6 months worth of the rent cost to cover some of these expenses just to ease you into settling into your property. Some first time renters also do not plan for emergency repairs. Now, even if the landlord is responsible for these, you may still have to cover some small fixes upfront. So before you rent, save some extra money just beyond the cost of rent. Now, a good rule is to have about 3 to 6 months worth of rent of additional savings so that you can use it to handle any surprises that may come up over time. Moving on, a final mistake is ignoring red flags before moving into the property. Sometimes a place looks great on the surface, but then the problems only show up after you moved into the property. And before signing any lease or tenancy agreement, do well to inspect the property. Now, there are a couple of things you need to look out for. So do well to look out for leaks and plumbing issues, Open the tabs when you get to see the property, flush the toilets, and make sure everything runs properly. Do well to also check the electrical wiring. You may want to test the sockets to see if, do the lights come on, do the lights flicker, and then are there any exposed wires? You also want to check the security and also the locks. Do all the doors and all the windows close securely? What types of metals are used for the burglar-proof fixtures? Now, if you have hollow tubes, you should know that those are very easy to bend using car jacks. Don't ask me how I know this. I've been a victim. So do well to check all these things. Also do well to check for pests and also any types of infestations. Look for signs of rodents or insects before you commit to taking up that property. Check if the place has issues with cockroaches, bed bugs, and also you may want to check for dumping and mold. This is something that a lot of people normally skip on, but then it's very crucial if you're going to be in good health on that property. Anywhere you see dumping or you see some development of mold, you should be really, really wary of such a place. Get it treated before you move in. Otherwise, over time, you may just create health issues for yourself. So do well to not skip on checking for some of these things. A good way to get all these checks done right will be to get a professional property inspector to help you. That is, if you don't mind spending a little extra just to guarantee your peace of mind in the property while you're staying there. So if you have the money, get a professional to do it. Otherwise, get someone who has some good experience to also be a second eye for you. If something feels off, do well to ask questions. And if the landlord is being hesitant in responding to your questions, that may also be a red flag, something to watch out for. So there you have it, the 5 biggest mistakes first-time renters normally make. Now you're better prepared to find a home that works for you without all the stress, all the scams, and all the surprises. Have you ever experienced any of these rental mistakes? Drop a comment and let's discuss, and let's also see how we can help others beyond this discussion to get it right. And of course, before you go, do also subscribe to the channel for more real estate insights. Like the video if you found it helpful. Share it with someone who needs this information. And as always, I'm Desmond Kafui, and this is Ghana Ground Up. I'll catch you on the next episode.